Yeah, everyone's staying frosty. What's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I'm your host, Justin Schwarzenberger, and today we are going to be checking out and talking about components as a service and some magic and some complications. So it should be pretty cool. Joining us today as panelists, we've got Austin McDaniel with us. Austin, what's going on?
How's it going, everybody? I love magic, so I'm super excited for the show.
Yes, well, I can't guarantee magic, but there might be some magic, so we'll see. Mike Brocky's with us. Mike, what's going on?
I'm going to bring the magic.
All right. And our guest today is Aaron Frost. Aaron, what's going on, man?
How's it going, guys? I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. I finally got my Frosty show here. So you were on twice, maybe more than twice. I don't know, but I know you were on with Kenzie Dodds, and you were on with Jeff Welpley, and now it's my turn.
Now I'm on the Justin show. Nice.
I call it the ngAir show, but you know,
yeah, good.
So. All right, so we're talking components as a service today, right?
Yeah. So, can I explain it real quick? What it is?
Absolutely, please
do. So, components as a service, what it is a lot of us. I mean, historically in Angular, the way you get a component in your UI is by just adding it to your template, and whether that's a route template or another components template, that's how we get it into the UI, and that's great. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about Angular. I mean, that's one of the things that made us all fall in love with it, was just how easy it is to compose UIs and make reusable directives and stuff like that, reusable components. But sometimes we build views that are super complex, and maybe they've got collections inside of collections, and a lot of our elements end up having things that, if we put them in our UI, and they're only going to get used 1% of the time, then we end up paying a lot of tax and performance to set those things up and tear them back down when 99% of the time they're not going to get used. So we end up with things like tooltips or popovers, drop-down type things, or modal windows that they kind of need to be in our markup, because if you click on this, I need the modal to appear, right? So you have to put the modal in the markup for the component. Or if I click on this, I need this popover to appear. So you end up putting all these watchers for these popovers, and maybe you're smart and you ngF them off, but then you have to create this whole series of states, Boolean states, for if you should ngF those things on. So you end up with this whole mess of overhead that's inside of a collection of the same exact mess, and so you end up wasting a lot of resources for things that 99% of the time aren't going to be required. Another thing is, you look at your template for your component, and the component's like this much of the template, and then like 80% of the template is those things that aren't turning on but 1% of the time. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Like you've all seen the thing I'm saying, yeah?
Absolutely. Your template just gets crowded with a bunch of other ancillary things that aren't the primary function of the component.
Yeah, and aside from being ancillary things, they're rarely turned on, right? Like, yeah, and they end up being a huge, cluster. So the idea behind components as a service is you don't put those things in your markup anymore, but rather you call a service that will put it in, and it'll put it in the DOM at that point, and they'll get compiled when that service gets called. So if you want to pop over, you tell the service, hey, create a popover and anchor it to this thing that just got clicked, and then that way, let's say you've got a collection of 99 things. Instead of having 99 hidden popovers, you have 0 hidden popovers until you need one, and then it will compile that one on the fly right there, and then attach it to the thing that you need it to be attached to. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What's you talk about how we have all those, we might have all those things hidden. the way that we do it today. Is there any performance implication of like doing these dynamically like this?
So I totally just lost you guys. Can you repeat the question? Like you all froze. So I didn't hear your question. Sorry, man.
Yeah, no worries. So, you talked about the performance of like creating all these hidden elements. Is there any performance penalty for automatically injecting these? Like, is Angular, really good at making these inject and bind a whole component up really fast?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, because it will work with AOT, and so you don't really you're not super worried about like having a slow performance or using the JIT compiler at runtime. But I mean, no matter how big your app is, to turn on a popover that's got 50 DOM elements, I don't care how big your app is, that's a pretty fast thing to do. So even if you've got a pretty advanced modal that you need to pop up, those operations get pretty quick. And it's definitely better to do it when you need it rather than trying to. So let's say it was heavy. It's still better to do it on the fly rather than to try and ngIf off 100 of those things because it's inside of a collection. So there's really not a lot of scenarios where it wouldn't be better to do that. Now, and another thing is, because it all comes down to strategy, Austin, right? So maybe in some scenarios, maybe because to your point, maybe you've got a really advanced modal or something that's really advanced and you want it to pop up. So maybe you don't want to wait till that thing on a click for that one, because then maybe it takes a half a millisecond or a half a second after the click, and that's pretty slow, right? So maybe on some of those things, rather than like loading those in the moment, you can do what's called delayed loading, and you can load those things at a delayed moment. Like, so after your view inits, then maybe do some sort of a timeout or some sort of a wait, and then init it maybe at some point in the future when the DOM's slowed back down, and then that way it's ready to be immediately used.
And you'd still use you'd still use the component service for that too. So
totally, yeah, totally.
So you're still using it, and you're getting all the benefits of both of those.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now you mentioned AOT. So how does this work with AOT? We know what AOT is. It's got a Angular has a magical thingy that traverses all your DOM and like precompiles it for you. If I'm kind of doing these things dynamically, right? Like it has no way to to jump into this spot and optimize this. So how does AOT work?
So that's a good question. So you could write this. There's a couple ways you could write a service to do this. You do it one way, and in Angular you can do it that same way or a different way. So the way where it gets to where you're saying where Angular doesn't know what's happening, so there's no way to crawl in. I'm trying to if I'm trying to compile a random DOM string, yeah, Angular can't optimize that at build time because the string coming in could be different every single time, right? If I'm trying to do random DOM strings, then yeah, Angular, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that, and the I'm going to have to ship the compiler to production, which is, we're all trying to not do that, right? Like that's the goal. A lot of people are going to end up doing it, but ideally we don't do that. But in Angular, it's really nice because it's based on types. So if you can pass the instead of passing the service a random DOM string, you could pass it a type. That is something Angular can optimize for and could AOT compile. So I haven't built an example where you can pass it a random DOM string. I don't think that would be insanely hard. But the example I've built in Angular is where you pass it a component definition, and then it knows how to go and get that component's factory. And once it's got its factory, you're done, right? because it can just make it. And the only thing you really need to provide the service is the component definition, and then also the inputs or outputs, as what do you want it to anchor that thing to? Like when it makes the tooltip or the popover, what should it anchor to? Should it just anchor to the body, or is there did you have a thing in mind that it should anchor it to? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that actually brings up a good question about anchoring it to the body. I'm going to throw some curveballs at you here. In Angular, there's actually no like, in AngularJS, there was always like that one element that we could always rely on being in the body. In Angular, there's not really that, because it's kind of platform.
It's universal, right? Yeah, it's universal.
Yeah, it's platform agnostic. So the body could be, a server, it could be a phone app, it could be the web. So there's like no guaranteed position to put those elements. So how are you dealing with that with your service?
So for this demo, I just said, hey, if you didn't pass me an anchor, then I'm going to default to, I could either throw an error so at dev time you immediately go, oh, I have to pass him an anchor. Or in mine, I just said, if they don't pass me an anchor, just do document.body. Like just say, hey, I'm going to bail out in this case and just put it on the body. And for what you're talking about in a universal experience, that's not going to work, right? That's going to fail 10 times out of 10. But you could figure out how to provide some top-level view container ref into this thing, because that's really what it needs, is a view container ref. It doesn't need an HTML element ref. It needs a view container ref. So as long as you could get one of those, and a view container ref, that's kind of the universal object class for maybe a DOM element, maybe a server rendered element. Like that's kind of, and that's what this service that I've written requires. If you're in an environment where server, because a lot of us work for enterprise and you're behind a paywall, and so we don't really care about server rendering because we don't have to worry about SEO and optimizing for that stuff. And so a lot of people don't share those concerns, especially if we're migrating from AngularJS apps, which I think is a humongous % of Angular apps. But if you were in that scenario, you definitely can build. You could just require them to pass you the view container ref, which is pretty easy to get access to.
So one thing that I've seen the Angular material team do is they have these like containers that you just throw in your body, and you throw at the root of your element, and that's like where all these elements are going to go. So
they call those portals.
Yeah, a portal.
Yeah, portals. Yeah.
Yeah, the portals. And so I just throw the portal, in my base component, my master component, and then I can kind of ensure that there's always something there to take on that element there. And so that's one way that they have kind of worked around some of this universal stuff.
And you can do that with this as well. You could also, I'm trying to remember what this is called. What's that hash thing, Justin? I know Justin will know. What's that hash thing called where you can just put a hash on your view?
Template reference variable?
Yeah, so your template reference variable. So you could just drop a template reference variable anywhere and get the view container ref for that, and then you can pass that into the service. So you could also create your own version of the material portals and just use those as well. Like it's not canonized, it's not strict. Again, and under the same thing, that means it's not super mature, but it gives you freedom to kind of do what you need to do with it.
So
sorry, go ahead.
The release of the latest material that has the component dev kit in it has some functionality in that component dev kit where they've extracted the underlying logic of the material components and stuff like that, and it has the portal support for dynamic loading of components.
You stole my next line.
Oh, you were talking a lot. I had to throw something in there.
Sorry.
That's available now. So like a lot of that code that we looked at, Aaron, on Cruise, they've kind of abstracted some of that to make it a little bit easier to work with, kind of a shorter line. So that's kind of cool.
Good.
And that kit, that CDK just dropped earlier last week.
Yeah, well, I'm completely ignorant to it. So any questions about that have to go to you guys.
So, hey, really quick before we dive any more into it, let's get a higher level concept, really quick discussion about it. So I think it's similar to the concept that people think about like with routing, right? And router outlets and how you're kind of going, okay, I'm making this markup, I'm making this component, and it's going to have like a placeholder where I'm going to put other components or composition of components into at some time based on some action or something like that. So what I'm really looking at here in the Angular space is I'm creating my components. I'm creating these other components that are going to represent this modal, this tooltip, this overlay, whatever it's going to be. I'm actually like constructing that component experience. And then I'm doing all the wire up and everything needed to basically put that into this container on the fly. In this case, using this component as a service as the broker to do that, the same way like the router would use its logic to put it in a router outlet sort of concept. And then you have this need to, you know, as you're building these components, think about I want to build for AOT. So I need the whole system to be able to know about and find these component types. That's why when you talk about the ability to place this type, handle this type into there, and then also register these components as like entry components in your ng module. Now you have this ability to construct this on the fly, yet pre-compile all this stuff. And
there's other ways you can do it, right? Like, so there's like a magic method buried somewhere in, I don't know if it's core or where it's at, but it's get module factory, and I think you could use something like that to where you can
component factory.
No, it's not that. It allows you to pass it like a string ID, and on your module you can just say, hey, here's my ID, and then you can go and say, hey, get me the factory for this ID, basically, and that might allow you to pull the components out of the factory to get the component factories out of that module factory and get your factories that way. So there's more than one way you could do this if you sat down and banged your head against it for a while. An example that I have written up that was I heavily for the implementation depended on Justin, but it very much follows the way that I've done it in AngularJS as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the other point here. So this thing that you have built and are working on works for AngularJS and Angular?
So this one implementation doesn't work for both, but I have this pattern in both. Yeah. Does that make sense? AngularJS is completely different because you don't have component definitions in AngularJS. You can only pass a service a DOM string. Like that's the only thing you have in AngularJS. There's no niceties like being able to give it a component definition. So you have to give it DOM strings. So it's a completely different process at that point when you're compiling it up with a $compile service from AngularJS versus in Angular, you actually have component definitions and types that you can say, hey, make one of these types. And if you're in AOT mode, it should already have the factory and it can just pull it out. And if it doesn't, it can go ahead and get the factory. But anyway, yeah, so that's kind of there's different. It's the same paradigm, but the implementation details are completely distinct. So yeah, I haven't made one service to do both. No.
When we were looking at this on the cruise, you had this all abstracted out into a service. Is that what you've published up on GitHub, or?
Yeah, so up on GitHub, I have this service called AF Spawn Service, and it just is a service that you pass it a component definition, and it will spawn you one, and it will attach it to the anchor you gave it. And if you don't give it an anchor, in my example, I just ignored the universal purity that Austin's talked about, and just said, if you don't give me one, put it on the body. Because a lot of times I don't really care. Like on modals, I don't really care about the anchor. I just need to know. I just put the modal on the body, because modals don't really need to anchor to anything specifically most of the time. But like popovers and tooltips, those things definitely need an anchor, because like if I hover over someone's name, I can't have the tooltip appear in the top left, right? Like it needs to appear right there at the thing that I just hovered, right? So so yeah, like yeah.
So the inner workings, the whole conversation we've been having about resolving components and everything else, you've basically internalized all of that into a service, and you basically say, hey, give me one of these things and put it here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's some stuff I put in it. There's more than one way you could implement it. But sometimes you need to say, hey, give me one of these things. And that thing might have inputs and outputs though. So what I have it do is I say, hey, give me one of these things, and then it will give you back an observable that you can then pipe your input data into. You can say, hey, push this down in there through this observable, push in there, like emit an object that has key value pairs. And if it can find an input with that key, it'll push that value onto the key. So it uses kind of an observable stream to allow you to push new values in, and as well as get your outputs called back. Or if you need to update your outputs as well, you would push them through that observable. If that makes sense.
It does. So does that also then tie into change detection internally?
Yeah, so if you emit a new thing into that observable, yeah, then the change detection works, and it fires the update on the component. And on that repo, and we'll share it in the links. On that repo, there's actually an example of that working with the change detection and everything. So I haven't sat down and made this like an npm module that you could install into your service and depend on. It's something I need to do, but for now it's just a repo with an example that you can copy into your own thing. But yeah, at least the heavy lifting of how in the hell do I do this is done, because when I sat down and said this stuff, I know how to do this in AngularJS, and I'm a wizard at it. When I sat down to do this in Angular, it wasn't easy, and there wasn't a lot of good documentation. And had I not been sitting with a wizard named Justin, who had done the exact same thing on his own earlier, I don't think I would have been able to get it done on time for needing to show it at NG Cruise. But yeah, it got done, and it actually works well, and it's a pattern that I think people should be using. A lot of the symptoms I've seen in the past where I knew I needed to do something like this, we would measure in DevTools that when you change routes, it took longer to tear down the old route than to build a new one. And I know that that's not a good comparison, because sometimes the new view is small, so of course it's going to take less time to build the new one than it was to tear down the old one. But sometimes it had to tear down, hundreds of tooltips that never ever are getting used. And it was like, bloody hell, why aren't we making the tooltips then? Like, let's stop doing that until they're actually needed. And so the way we did tooltips was different, and the way I would recommend doing tooltips is different than the way I would recommend doing popovers or modals and stuff. But yeah, the idea is kind of the same idea though, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of hidden stuff there that you touch on that you have to think about when you're going, like, it's not just about putting this component in this slot and showing it, right? I mean, the inputs and outputs are a great one that you alluded to, of this concept of, okay, I'm if I'm building that in line, then I have access to everything around it. I can flow things in and pop things out of it and sort of things. But now I have to dynamically do that. So now it's like, great, I've got a way to render a component and throw it through this pipeline and put it in the view and sort of thing. But how do I interact with it, through that process? Yeah. And flowing that all through, and then creating the API and thinking about how are users going to use that, in an ideal manner, and maybe fit something that's similar to what they're already doing. Like you talked about inputs and outputs, so something we're already used to on our components and child components, and now you provide that same type of API when you're crafting.
Yeah, and you have to and you have to be responsible when you're doing something like this, because when you create your own component, when the component that it was created from gets destroyed for whatever reason, you have to make sure you're cleaning up the ones that you spawned. Because if you don't clean those up, you just leaked memory, and you've got events listeners on the DOM on things that you don't even have pointers to anymore, and so you just leaked memory, and so you suck at life. So you have to be more responsible this way, right? But I don't think that's bad to say to a developer, you need to be an adult about this. Like, I think that's an okay thing to say to someone, you know?
Yeah, no, it's sure, and you know, you're basically feeding and saying, look, this is the same paradigm. If you build a component and you're putting it in another component, you're following these same manners. You know, you're doing this ng on destroy, this input, this output. It's a similar API that you're used to, so no big deal there. But really, the onus becomes on you now as the developer of this library of like, what do I have to support? I'm really kind of almost supporting the whole life cycle and engine workflow of what Angular does to a component that's rendered in line there. And now you're providing all those hooks and everything through your system.
You're really just needing the create and the destroy. That's really the only ones that you're now kind of a proxy for. You just need you're creating it, you decide when it's created, and you need to also tap it into when it needs to get destroyed, right? You're not like needing all the lifecycle hooks.
But you did solve the change detection part, so you needed that, right? I mean,
yeah,
you did solve that problem.
Yeah, but if you need to push new data into that, then yeah, I gave you a way to do that. And again, the way I did it was with an observable. You could do it another way, and it would be totally fine. Like, again, it's not canonized. This is simply one example, right? And I kind of wanted to go into what you just said, Justin, which is there's a lot of things to consider. And let me give you an example. If I said to you, don't make the tooltips, do those on the fly. Well, at that point, you're removing your tooltip from the DOM, and instead, you're going to have to add a hover listener, right? Well, now you just removed 1,000 components and added 1,000 hover listeners. So you still suck at life, you know? You didn't optimize anything. And so the way I would recommend doing a tooltip is just add one global hover listener because tooltips is an example that really is more specific to the web, right? That has nothing to do with server-side rendering, right? So so you're going to want to do like a global event listener, and you're going to want to delegate it down to those things that have tooltips on them. And then when that thing gets hovered, go ahead and compile that on the fly and get that in there and make your tooltip then. But you don't want to replace 1,000 components that are ngF'd off with 1,000 hover listeners. Like there's no benefit there. All you did was add complexity with zero gain. But if you can replace all of that with just one listener that will compile tooltips on the fly, well, I think you earned your pay that day. So yeah. And
right, remember, you keep on saying compiled on the fly, and since it's still going to be AOT compatible, by being able to provide an entry component, it's actually not compiling it on the fly. It's just rendering it on the fly.
Sure, my bad. I'm
it's all good. I just
the
wanted
right
to be clear. That's all.
Yeah. I'm not using all the right vernacular. But yeah, exactly. You're totally right, Justin. And you could make one that you wanted to compile random DOM strings. I don't think you should do that though, personally. That's what I like about Angular's implementation better is you have to specify the component that you want. Whereas in AngularJS, we were all just lazy and we're like, I'm not going to make this thing into a component. I'm just going to keep passing it around as a random DOM string. You know what I'm saying? Whereas you should have formalized it and made it a component like Angular forces you to. So that's what I like about the implementation we have is it forces you to make it into a component, which is important. So
we had a show not too long ago talking about a similar concept, and one of his use cases for automatic component like compilation like this and like creating components from DOM strings was if I have like, say I have like a plugin framework where people can, upload, different plugins and they're stored on my server, on my server, all I have is HTML, and now I need to like turn this string into a component on the fly. And so that was one of the use cases, really the only use case that I can think of where you want to do something like that as well.
Where you're going to need to ship the compiler, you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, we all work at different companies. Everyone listening to this works at a different company, and every company has different needs. So I built mine for needs that are predictable to me. Someone's going to have other needs that I can't predict, and they might need to do a random DOM string implementation of the same thing. No one's going to finger wag them for needing that, because you need what you need and you got to do it. So build what you need, and my implementation just doesn't support that. But that doesn't mean I'm finger wagging someone else for needing it, because
you should avoid what you need. Though. You should avoid it if you absolutely can.
Yeah, totally. You should avoid it.
At the same time,
sorry, go ahead.
No, you haven't published it. What you've given is a roadmap of this is how you can do it. Now, you said you have aspirations of actually publishing it as a way of doing it, but at the same time, it's open source, so people can take a look at it and manipulate it as they need, but it's a good starting point.
Yeah. So in the talk, I gave a lot of my examples in Angular because AngularJS is slower. Pattern is super, super effective for people who have big AngularJS apps, which this show and really all shows still work in AngularJS. And even if they don't write this, they still maintain AngularJS because it's been around for 6 years, and most Angular apps currently are AngularJS. So a lot of my examples are AngularJS, and I have a kind of a sibling repo next to this AF spawn service that shows how to do it in AngularJS. And AngularJS is where we've had a lot more performance needs to focus on, and one, because we have more of it, but two, just because it's slower. And so I've really implemented this heavily. My example in AngularJS, on a gigantic app, and it works very, very well, and it doesn't leak memory, and it's the way you should do components in AngularJS on things that are inside of collections. Simply change detection is just more expensive in AngularJS, and every piece of efficiency that you can get out of a collection, you need to do. And I realize that you're kind of walking away from some of the niceties of Angular, but sometimes you have to walk away from the niceties to get performance back. And there's nothing wrong with it. I wrote a blog article a few years ago called Jailbreaking Angular, and it was about being brave enough to walk outside of the Angular framework and do things to get performance out of it. And so this kind of follows that same paradigm. Sometimes you need to jailbreak it to get it. Because I needed to jailbreak it because I needed to do a drag and drop. And imagine doing drag and drop in AngularJS and trying to keep, as you're moving the thing that's getting dragged, and you're trying to put the drop zone where it's going to get dropped. Imagine trying to get 60 frames a second in AngularJS on that stuff. Like, it just wasn't happening. And so I was like, jailbreak it. Do it outside of Angular. It's totally fine to do that. And this components as a service kind of follows that same thing. You don't want to put all those components in your markup because they're rarely used. Then don't. Use this service to create these and make them Angular still, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's all in the name of performance. None of this should happen on small sample demo apps that students are writing in school, that we're writing for ourselves. These are for enterprise. This is an enterprise suggestion, an enterprise solution that I'm recommending. So yeah, and it is more effective in AngularJS than it is in Angular. Angular needs it less than AngularJS does, but if you're about to start a venture and your app in Angular is going to be around for 5 years, which best of luck to your company, and hopefully you are around in 5 years. You should expect it to be around in 5 years. Then you need to follow these principles today before it gets unwieldy. So yeah.
Yeah, these
And
are absolutely things that people need to be thinking about, right, and have on their mind, and be ready to do these trade-offs, right? Because I mean, that's what it is. I mean, you talk about jailbreaking and going outside Angular, or making these decisions to go down this path or that path. You're really just going, I'm trading off. You know, I know I'm doing that, but I have this thing I need to accomplish, and it's important, and it's a little more important than the trade-off that I'm making.
Yeah.
But then also being cognizant of the fact that these things are going to happen and going to exist in this world as you build out this more complex app in Angular, as we saw in Angular JS. And so you need to be prepared that to hit these walls and to figure out how you want to approach that from a business standpoint, and then also from an architecture standpoint.
And that was another thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
We keep on stepping on each other's toes. No, the idea of when you want to do this and the patterns to recognize of when this is a good idea. I liked in your talk how you went into not just, hey, this is a solution to a problem, but this is how to recognize the problem as well.
Yeah, I've kind of touched on some of those in here. Like, if your view takes longer to tear down than it takes to set up the new one, then that means you're tearing down entirely too much crap. See if you can't get rid of it. Like, it just doesn't make sense to have bad performance because of teardown. Like, that's silly to me. And imagine if tearing it down took that much time. How much time did it take to set it up? Like, so that's not good either. And so it just, I feel like when I read stories about like John Carmack back in the day when he was writing Doom and like figuring out how to make computers render engines do things efficiently, like for him, every flop was a consideration. And for JavaScript developers, we're just like, we don't give a shit. Just make 100 of these things that are never going to be displayed. And we have the luxury to not have to care as much as John Carmack did. But sometimes you need to. And that was what I was about to say, Justin, is number one, before any of these considerations can be made, you have to care. You have to care if you got 60 frames per second. And if you don't care, then this hangout that we're doing right now doesn't really matter to you, you know? And if you don't care because you feel like it's not your job to care, I think you need to challenge whatever ceiling you think is over your head. I don't really think that ceiling exists. You need to challenge that one. You know, like, try and check it, because it's not there. You need to break through the ceiling of performance. I don't care if you're a junior developer or a principal engineer. You own this, and so you need to be looking at these things.
Yeah, Aaron, I totally agree about your caring point there. It's super important. I think that, you know, not only for, I mean, it's also the discussion of it, right? When you go and you're on a team and you say, look, we need to be thinking about this stuff. We need to, when we architect our components and start saying, oh, well, it's easy to make components. We make a billion gazillion components, and let's just keep doing it. It makes us contain these things, and it's easy to think about it and stuff like that. Well, what are we paying to do that? And you know, let's be serious. Like, it's not just a little bit of bytes here and there. It adds up, and it all plays out when it loads, when it pre-builds it, when it tears it down. All this stuff are factors. And once you start caring about those pieces, you start being able to vision what's actually happening and the prices that you're paying. And now you can make better, sound decisions about solving those challenges and ultimately making a better app.
Yeah. I kind of, you reminded me of something that Brokey just said, and I want to touch on it. There's other things you can do to get some of the performance back in your app. This isn't the only thing. A huge one is lazy loading. Okay, lazy loading will improve your time to first meaningful paint. It'll get it down because it can't call the bootstrap call. Like, bootstrap can't fire, right, until all the JavaScript's been parsed into memory. So as much of that as you can cut out, your app's just, your time to first meaningful paint is just going to improve, right? So that's a huge one. So lazy loading is big for that, but lazy loading is also good for, and a lot of us won't see this. A lot of us developers, because we develop on nice Windows machines or a MacBook Pro, right? And we've got at least 8 gigs, probably 16 gigs of RAM. So a lot of us aren't really going to see how much, when you lazy load, the amount of memory pressure that gets relieved. because we got so much memory that relieving the pressure of a couple megs of JavaScript, we're not even going to notice. But when when your customers using IE, you know, they're going to notice, dude. I promise they will notice the relief of the memory pressure from lazy loading. If they can parse half as much JavaScript in order to do a first meaningful paint on a non-Chrome machine, on an IE machine, or on a slow old Windows machine on IE, they will notice. I guarantee you. And so some of the times as developers, we're not gonna run into some of the ceilings that our users are. And so yeah, there's things like lazy loading as well that can help. And there's other considerations like getting serious about memory leak hunting, and just getting in there and be like, I am going to find all the memory leaks and I am going to fix all of them. Because yeah, they exist. And so so yeah, there's more than just this, but this is one big thing that I used, and I decided to give a talk about it and to write a library for it. So yeah, it's not the end all solution, but it's a very important solution. So yeah.
It's a thoughtful solution.
Yeah.
Hey, do you have something you can show? You want to pull something up real quick?
Yeah, can I show you this? I'm on my work laptop right now, so I don't have it running, but can I show you guys this repo? Is that cool? Okay. So let me share my screen real quick. Screen share. All right, let's share this guy. All right. So this spawn service is an example of how to do this in Angular. So it's a simple little ng CLI app, and if you come into the source, you've got an index.html, and there's not a lot of code in here. So let me show you this AF spawn service.
Can you bump the font up a bit on that too, please?
Sorry, yep, let me do that. One second. That better?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So this service that you would inject into anywhere where you want to use it, you just call service.createComponent, okay? And what you pass to it is you give it the type of the thing you want it to make, okay? So I'm not going to make you, it's any for me, but whatever type you give me, that's the type I'm going to make. I also optionally let you give me a view container, which is an anchor to attach it to. And then I also let you pass in a context, which is just an object of key value pairs where the keys represent the names of the inputs or outputs, okay? And that's optional as well. You don't have to pass that in either. And so when you call this, the most simple example is you're going to call create component and just give it the type, all right? And what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead and it's going to get the factory for this component. And if you gave me a view container, I'll go ahead and use the view container to create the component. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and container ref. I'm going to use the factory to create it using the injector that the server has access to. And then I'm going to take the app ref and I'm going to attach the view that I just created. Anyway, it's a little bit more intense. And then I go ahead and just append it to the body. At that point, I wire up the outputs. So anything that you passed in, I go ahead and I wire up the outputs. And I make sure, and I create an observable that I can then pass back to you so that you can then emit values into. So that's kind of the implementation of this thing. And then I go ahead and I return a detach function and a next function. So you can call .next on this observable to pipe new data into it. So this is the service. Let me go ahead and show you how you use it. Is that okay?
Yeah, please do.
All right. So if you come into this component, he goes ahead and he injects this spawn service, right? He requests to be injected. And then inside of his view, let me pull up his view real quick. He's got this show another thing method, okay? So whenever you show another thing, this is the function that's gonna, the click on that is what's gonna call this spawn service. So let's go back in and Hold on 1 second. See this dummy outlet? I'm using this. What's this called? Template reference variable?
Yep.
Okay. So I referenced this dummy outlet, and this is what I want it to. Anytime you click on this thing, I want the spawn service to make something and put it in this dummy outlet. So let me go ahead and show you the code for that. So go back into the component. And down here, when I say show another thing, I take the context, which is the title that I want it to have, and I want it to have an on-click event that just does some sort of a console log. And at that point, I say spawn service.create component, and I pass it in my app dummy component, which is it is just a really dumb component. And then I don't pass it a view container. I could pass it that template reference variable, but I didn't. And then I pass it in that context that I made, which is one input and one output. And then it gives me back this spawn reference. Okay. And then just to show that the data binding is working, inside this set interval, I update the title in the context, and I call spawn reference.next to pump new data down into it. And if you check this out, you'll see that every 100 milliseconds it's updating the title with a new string. So yeah, and that's kind of what it's for. And the other method that you're not seeing in here is on this spawn reference. If I call spawnref.detach, that will go ahead, and that's what kind of cleans up after the component that you just created. So again, this is a very simple example with just two components, one that spawns the other one. It's how you would implement this in a larger app and on a large scale. That makes sense? So if anyone wants to use this or has any questions, they can reach out to me. And I'm willing to try and answer any questions that you have. Also, if you want to like PR this or fork it and deploy it to NPM, not offended, I would totally be down with that. So feel free to reach out with that as well. Anyway, I'm gonna stop sharing somehow. Did I lose all you guys? Are you guys all on Twitter now?
No.
Brokey's on Twitter.
Yeah.
No comment.
So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out with if you're able to use the component dev kit from Angular Material to like plug in some of that plumbing that you had in there and just make some of that. I don't know. I mean, you got it pretty concise, so it might not be
pretty concise
to bring that other library in to do it. But.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty concise in there, and obviously that's thanks to your help. A huge tip of the hat to you, man. I also want to take a second to do a tip of the hat to my friend. His name's Tyler Russell, and I work with him. I've worked with him for somewhere around 6 or 7 years now, and he's been an insane mentor. And a lot of these ideas were sparked by him. And once he sparked the idea, I just embraced it and have run with it a lot ever since. So Tyler Russell, a freaking legend in my mind. And so I just wanted to shout out to you and to Tyler and Brokey. Brokey obviously was there with us as we built this as well. So huge tip of the hat to you three. So thanks, guys.
I was just the human caffeine, keeping everybody awake.
That was a late night. That was fun.
That was a lot of fun.
All right, well, we better wrap this thing up. We're getting to the top of the hour. Got to get into our picks and stuff. So unless anybody on the panel has any other last questions, anything, we're all good? All right.
I feel like Austin was just trying to trick me at first, and then I don't know if I fell for his tricks that he hasn't tried to trick me anymore.
No. I've actually built one of these as well.
Okay.
So I knew the pitfalls, so I wanted to hear how you did it and collaborate with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
With everyone.
Austin and Mike help us extract content out of our guests, so they're prepping you with questions and stuff to help you talking. So
that's good.
Get some good points there. All right, let's get into picks. Mike, what do you got?
Make sure I'm not muted. I have a few things. First one, to learn more about this, it's in the playlist for the NG Cruise videos. The link for that playlist for all of those talks are up and online on YouTube. And to carry the video theme forward, also the videos from Angular Contributor Days that was right after ngConf are also up. So a lot of content there. Feel free to go out and watch those. Some pretty interesting discussions, especially revolving around the community. And also, new version of Visual Studio Code dropped. 1.14 is out. So enjoy that. Some of those new features.
Saying it dropped, or does it have anything cool?
Oh, I didn't look through the full changelog yet.
They bumped the version number.
It's got stuff. Yeah, first one on the list: integrated terminal improvements. Also, a new diff pane too. I remember I'm using the Insider's build, so I've had these features or some of these features for a little bit. The new diff pane is actually kind of nice. That it'll give you a little bit more information about what branches you're merging with conflicts. Very nice feature.
Awesome, Austin. What do you got?
Yeah, a couple things. There's a new HTTP module coming, and everyone should be really excited about this. This is in 4.3. RC0, it's going to give us, we no longer have to say everything is JSON because duh, it's kind of JSON unless you work on a crappy app. Sorry. And it has interceptors, which is a big feature that I really liked in AngularJS. So I'm really excited to see that feature come. And then the other one, Material 2, a new version dropped last week, and it has a data table in it. Everyone should be super excited about that. It's their first cut of the data table. It doesn't have virtualization and things like that yet, but those are on the roadmap. That's it for me.
Very nice. Very nice. All right. I have 3 picks. My first one is Dev Doodles by Una Kravitz, and she's got this Instagram that she has for dev_doodles, DOODLES, where she has these doodles that explain concepts in these little graphical pictures that she's drawn. It's pretty awesome. And more Una, she's got a podcast called Tools Day. That's pretty cool. Talks about dev tools and things like that. Tools Day, TOOLSDAY.io. And then my last one is The Defiant Ones on HBO. It's a series. There's a 4-part series right now. It's talking about Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre. I binge watched that last night, so I'm a little tired this morning, but that was pretty dope. So those are my picks. Aaron, why don't you close it out for us? What do you got? I think you're muted.
My bad. So I got 2 picks. I was trying to be polite, man, and mute myself. So hopefully a lot of the readers or listeners are also readers. There's an incredible book series called The Iron Druid Chronicles, and it's so much fun. It's ridiculous. Well, the author today, actually, he just released a new book in the series, and so everyone needs to go get the book because I already started reading it. I was up at midnight when it dropped, and it's just more epicness. Anyway, go check it out. It's called Besieged from the Iron Druid Chronicles. Author Kevin Hearn. On Audible, the narrator is beyond fantastic. So you need to, if you're on Audible, you definitely need to do the entire Iron Druid series. So okay, next pick is, we kind of talked about it before the show started. Rob Wormald, who, I mean, we all love, right? Generally, it's safe to say. Yeah, everyone loves Rob. Okay. So Rob Wormald, who everyone loves, obviously, he has got some ideas floating around, and they're usually epic. I mean, in my experience. And among that, he's got a late one that's epic called Angular Elements. And it's the idea that you write your Angular component like you do, right? Like you already do. I mean, everyone writing Angular is writing Angular components. And it's a very lightweight wrapper. that will make your Angular component a custom web element. And at that point, once it's a custom web element, it interacts seamlessly with everything. It interacts seamlessly with jQuery, with React, with Preact, with AngularJS, with Vue, because it's just a DOM element at that point. Once you've made it a custom element, it's not an Angular thing anymore. You've made it a native DOM thing. And so he's got this really cool repo called Angular Elements, and you need to go check it out. I've got the link will be in the. Is that true?
Yeah, when we have a home for putting the show notes up.
Okay, so, well, it'll at least be in the comment section on the YouTube video, yeah?
Yeah, we can tweet it out too.
Okay. All right. So it's just on Rob Wormald's GitHub in case you want it. It's called Angular Elements, but go check it out. I hope that this is the future of what Angular looks like. And I would love one of these for AngularJS as well, so that for all of us upgrading from AngularJS to Angular, or AngularJS to React, or AngularJS to whatever, right? It'd be nice to have one of these wrappers for that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping this is what the future of Angular looks like.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Aaron, thanks a ton for coming on the show, coming back, getting my time with you. That's awesome. Really love this component as a service concept and where you've taken it, and tons of potential there. I think that we got a lot of people talking on the YouTube's comments in the chat about the need for this in the enterprise level and stuff like that. So super useful. Thanks for sharing your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yep. Anytime. All right. Catch everybody next week. Later.
Peace.